I want to introduce our next speaker, who is a veteran of the ABLZ stage, a keynoter in the past, but making his Digest Connect debut, Eric McAfee, all the way from Cupertino, California. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. And it looks like we have quite a global audience here today. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes, and then we'll have some questions and answers afterwards. Aemetis is a NASDAQ-listed public company. We went on to NASDAQ in 2014, and we'll go quickly through the slides here, but we provided kind of a dense slide deck for you. So if you have any curiosity about some details, you can come back and take a look at any of these slides. At a glance, we're effectively two operating plants, one in California that's the largest biofuels plant in California. It's a 65 million gallon per year, 150 million revenues plant that we've operated in California since 2011. We have some upgrades we're going to talk about today to increase cash flow. We have an India biodiesel plant, which we built from the ground up in India starting in 2007. And we have successfully gotten that to positive EBITDA at about $6 million last year and have some growth there. We're not going to talk about that much today, but feel free to follow up with me if you have some curiosity about that. What we're also going to talk about today is our advanced fuels expansion projects. We have approximately 70 million plus dairy renewable natural gas system. Just completed the first phase about a week or two ago, and we're now into our second phase. We also have a Wastewood renewable fuels plant, which is in the advanced project development phase and looking for a lot of progress next year. We would expect construction to start next year. And then last is just for public investors, we have a balance sheet where we've taken a bridge loan from about a $3 billion financing partner we've had for 12 years. And we've been repaying that with low interest rate EB5 debt. As you can see from the right, we have approximately $40 million of 1% interest rate financing, just got approved for another little less than 200 investors, about $172 million at less than a 1% interest rate that will be used to repay our bridge financing. Next slide, a quick slide for the people that are just curious about why our stock has increased 500 or 600%. COVID-19 had an impact on certain ethanol producers, and certainly we responded very, very quickly within a few days, and we're able to upgrade our 65 million gallon per year plant in California to make sanitizer alcohol. But we also have a 50 million gallon per year plant in India. 10% of the product of a distilled biodiesel plant is refined glycerin. We built an entire separate production facility about the size of a biodiesel plant to make pharmaceutical grade glycerin. We did that a number of years ago, but sanitizer alcohol and refined glycerin are the two effective components of hand sanitizer. And so we ended up being the largest hand sanitizer alcohol producer in the Western United States within a very short period of time after the FDA allowed that to occur in March. Next slide is we have, again, following up the COVID-19 thing, sort of an interesting position in that we're sort of what I call a castle with a 2,000-mile moat around it. We're the only sanitizer alcohol supplier of any size in the entire Western United States. You have to go about 2,000 miles east of here to get to the next large-scale sanitizer producer. And so we went and we lease purchased 15 bulk trailers, so we wouldn't have to transport our sanitizer alcohol in fuel alcohol trailers, which have, of course, gasoline in them and benzene and everything else. And that enabled us to be a high volume supplier throughout the Western United States. And we have a built-in cost advantage because it takes 2,000 miles to come out and compete with us. So our overall strategy is eventually to be the alcohol supplier to Perel and Germex and all the brands you could think of when they are trying to supply the Western markets. There's just a fundamental, probably $1 per gallon cost advantage to buying from us. So our bulk business, as well as we're launching on Amazon, big box retailers, et cetera, with our own branded product. We're just intending to basically be the alcohol inside of sanitizers for the 100 million or however many people there are in the Western United States. And then our revenues for last quarter is sort of a update for you to just kind of get a grounding on where we're at. Net income was $2.2 million for the quarter. Adjusted earnings before interest, et cetera, was about $11 million for the second quarter. And we're in a volatile market with sanitizer alcohol, but by the second quarter of next year, we expect to be a medical grade USP producer that will kind of smooth out the earnings and cash flow a bit. This is a general slide for everybody. The concept here is, what are we supposed to be doing as an industry? And both federal and California low carbon renewable fuel standards are basically trying to displace petroleum high carbon fuels with low carbon fuels. And what we put here was, on the left-hand side is basically less value being contributed. And then to the right-hand side, the far right, is the highest value you can obtain. For those who are in the industry and thinking about building projects and how to do it, this is a bit of a stair-step process. And if you look at the far right, I want to point out that the federal D3 RIN, which is at the top right of your screen there, next to higher price, lower carbon, that D3 RIN is the only renewable identification number in the federal law that actually has a congressional calculation around it. All the other RINs float with the market on supply and demand. This one technically is what has to be paid by refiners if they don't acquire enough D3 RINs. So the stability of the D3 RIN price, currently roughly over $1.50 per RIN, is a big driver for looking at what would produce a D3 cellulosic RIN. And it happens to be that dairy biogas, which are cows eating plants, and then we make biofuels out of it, as well as Wastewood, which are plants directly being converted to biofuels, both create D3 RINs. And so as a project developer, we are currently the largest D6 RIN plant in California. We have an appetite to say, okay, well, how do you migrate from D6 RINs to D3 RINs? That's your federal strategy. And then how do you maximize your reduction of carbon intensity? Because if you can match D6 RINs, D3 RINs with carbon negative product, you're actually maximizing economics. To our knowledge, dairy biogas is actually the lowest carbon fuel in the world. It's a negative 350. When you turn it into negative carbon electricity, because of some efficiency mechanisms and calculations, you can actually end up with a negative 600 carbon intensity. Each point is worth about 1.6 cents. So there's lots of economics to be studied off of this slide. And it's always important for people to look at where their particular technology is falling on the slide and how the economics at federal, as well as if you're going to optimize, you're going to be going into a low carbon fuel standard environment, California being the largest. And so it's an important slide to consider as you're talking about things. Most of our management team has been with us since 2006 when I founded the company. And most of our board of directors, actually, John Block has been with us, I think, since 2007. But we have two individuals, former corporate secretary of Chevron. She was there for 38 years, but 20 years, Lydia Beebe was actually the corporate secretary reporting to the CEO. Jack Block was Secretary of Agriculture under Ronald Reagan. And then Naomi is a newer add to the company, but her background is at Chevron with a global project planning and strategy role, and now is head of Stanford's natural gas initiative. So I put up this slide pretty much every time I do a presentation because my opinion is it's all about building teams. And in the case of the biofuels industry, it's teams that can sustain for decades. It's unfortunately is an industry that faces external volatility that's oftentimes quite frustrating. And so the ability to build a team and then set out a strategy and implement it over a 15-year span is what enables real progress to be achieved on both technology as well as project development. This slide we won't go through with a lot of detail, but it lays out plant upgrades we're doing to a traditional corn ethanol plant to generate significantly in excess of $15 million per year of additional EBITDA. And on the left, we got a $8 million grant for a solar array with battery storage. We're in the design and construction process for that. We have an artificial intelligence plant management system that's being installed at the same time with the solar array. And then we got a $6 million grant for a mechanical vapor recompression unit. Total project cost there is probably roughly $20 million, but we got a $6 million grant for that. because the state of California is very interested in us moving off of petroleum natural gas and toward using electricity. Certainly electricity created by solar it allows our carbon intensity to be decreased. And the other upgrade we're doing, I mentioned already, is U.S. Pharmacopoeia alcohol, which is at the top line there. We'll exit with a little bit more capacity, about 70 million gallons a year of U.S. Pharmacopoeia medical grade sanitizer alcohol in Q2 of 2021. On the right-hand side are miscellaneous things we're doing that each one of them kind of chip away. You know, every $7 million makes a little bit of difference. So we completed the construction, lowering our carbon intensity score. We completed construction of our CO2 reuse plant. It's in full operation. The Mitsubishi membrane dehydration system is installed. We're doing the final installation and commissioning now, and then reconfiguring heat exchangers as a upgrade with the efficiency heat exchangers. So each of these upgrades add a little bit of cash flow, 3 to 7 or 10 million a year, and you add it all up, and it ends up being something that meaningful. This slide is one that is unusual in that our ethanol plant happens to be in the largest dairy shed in the entire United States. We have over 1 million dairy cows in the Central Valley of California. We supply up to 100 dairies, about 120,000 cows, with distiller's grain, which is animal feed. And so we went out and we signed up 17 dairies. We arranged about 70 million plus of capital. And we just completed the first phase. We put out a press release a week or two ago about this, in which we have 2 dairies with dairy digesters, on-site hydrogen sulfide cleanup, a pressurized pipeline for 4 miles, interconnected to our plant, and actually feeding the natural gas into the production of ethanol using what we project to be negative 350 carbon intensity dairy natural gas. Lots of economics, they're very positive here, but we're having a very big impact on the environment. 25% of the methane emissions in California come from dairy farms. So this is lots of details here. Feel free to get a hold of me if you want to talk about it. In terms of projects that are also creating D3 RINs and have carbon negative fuels, we have a Wastewood biofuels plant that's in advanced development stage. And first step is gasification, but we're using a contracted feedstock where we have a 20-year fixed price contract, and that is the 1.5 million acres of orchard wood in the Central Valley. Every 20 years, almonds die. 99% of the almonds in the United States grow within probably 100 or 150 miles of our plant in the Central Valley of California. And so that waste wood is about 3 billion pounds a year of waste material that's currently largely burned in the field. So we're converting that into valuable carbon negative. We project a negative 40 CI score on this project. And it's a gasification step and then a fermentation step with Lanztech, which has a fully operating facility in China that's been operating for more than 2 years. And Nentech started up a facility just recently, a commercial scale facility with Waste Management. So we believe these are 2 proven technologies that we're putting together along with our gas cleanup and other technologies to produce carbon negative renewable biofuels. The economics of these kinds of wastewood biofuels is basically transforming feedstock from being 70% of feedstock costs to less than 3%. Effectively, we're just paying for trucking. And transformation cost isn't dramatically different. G&A is not much different. So EBITDA is dramatically different. EBITDA of, in the 3 to 10% range, going to EBITDAs in the 60 to 70% range as we change the feedstock. And I like to say that all biofuels projects are basically determining what feedstock you have. That, to a large extent, determines what your process needs to be and can direct in what product you need to make. I put this slide in here because everybody at the end of the day has to raise money. Otherwise, this is all just a discussion. It's really not any activity. And so our Wastewood ethanol plant by itself is roughly an 80 million revenue company, a little bit over 50 million a year of adjusted EBITDA. This is a size in which we would basically have an opportunity to build approximately 16 times this capacity in order to take care of all the waste feedstock from orchards in Central Valley. That'd be at 4 locations. Each location would be roughly 3 phases of this thing. and a fourth location would be also expected. So we have some growth opportunities all within 100 miles of where we're sitting already, just by frankly converting biomass to electricity plants that are no longer operational. And last slide is a very nice picture of a road. So we look forward to your questions. And of course, you're going to get a copy of the slide deck. So you can contact me directly if you have any questions about any of the details I skipped over. Jim?
Well, Eric, a very fast tour. We're going to start, since you were so economical with your presentation, which I really always appreciate here. We are a digest, of course. Brevity is wit. But we're going to have some questions coming your way first, and we're going to get back to a lot of the questions that came in on HDL with for Perry Toms. So first of all, we had just to bring the two presentations a little bit together. There was some discussion in Perry's presentation about the value and the usages for digestate, that leftover from anaerobic digestion. What opportunities do you see there, and is it worth shipping long range to try to capture higher values than the current disposal methods?
It depends on whether the feedstock is carbon negative or not. One of the challenges we have with forest waste in California, in addition to the 160 million dead trees, is that there's really not a carbon negative model at the California Air Resources Board that provides the economics to justify doing anything with forest wood. So when you look across North America and you look at forest wood, it's still considered to be a positive carbon feedstock, whereas orchard wood starts as a negative 100 carbon intensity, and then the conversion process requires a little bit of energy, so it ends up being a negative 40. And this carbon intensity question actually would drive whether the digestate is worth anything. If the digestate has a lot of moisture, it's going to cost a lot of money to dehydrate it, and you're largely moving water. So you have to dehydrate first and then move it. But there could be a scenario in which you could find a carbon negative feedstock, one that was otherwise emitting methane when it ferments, or was being burned and creating CO2 and air pollution, and find a way to dehydrate it and then move that carbon negative feedstock, usually via rail in large capacity. And I could see a scenario in which that would actually work.
Eric, we've had a question that came in about, it was actually from a shareholder point of view, how the company differentiates itself from other competitors such as Pacific Ethanol, now moving into the sanitizer market. And one of the things that occurred to me in your presentation, and I just wanted to get your reaction to how shareholders think about this, is how much of a circular ecosystem Aemetis has built up over the years. And examples would be in your presentation how moving into the glycerol market in your India operation gave you a first advantage in the hand sanitizer market when that emerged. Clearly that wasn't necessarily contemplated at the time, but it was an advantage that you had because of the ecosystem you built. Also, the dairy relationships that you mentioned for distillers grains led to that quick advantage to be able to move with dairy farm relationships when you decided to move into RNG and biogas. Do shareholders recognize that as a differentiation point between your company and others? How do we talk to people about the circular economy to create value for those that have invested to build that?
I think as we see additional interest in ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance investing, people are caring much more about what your utilization of waste is, both utilizing waste as a feedstock, but also the wastes from our process. Effectively, distillers grade is a waste when you think about it, but it happens to be that we're the largest animal feed producer in the state of California as a waste product from making our sanitizer alcohol and fuel alcohol business. So we look at it as you can consume waste as a feedstock and also can upgrade the products we're making so that they're valuable rather than creating waste. And that circular thinking for us, that circular bioeconomy thinking for us, led us to decisions to put in $70+ million in using waste manure, which is a tremendous contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in California, as actually a feedstock for a carbon negative compressed natural gas or even carbon negative electricity to power Tesla motor cars and Tesla trucks. We looked at it as, well, those aren't waste streams, those are actually feedstock streams. One of my speeches I give it to the state of California regulators is, why are you burning our waste feedstock, when you allow these forest fires to happen, you should create an economic environment in which it's actually an economic incentive to do better forest management and use that waste feedstock to make materials out of. So our entire company's theme has been, let's create an internal circular economy, allows us to capture largely all of the economics and control the different aspects of what our costs are. So we end up with very predictable costs, and it requires perhaps maybe more investment and certainly a longer time horizon. But I think that's where we need to go as a society. So our company has an opportunity to kind of demonstrate how you can do that.
Eric, over the years, we haven't seen a huge amount of investment from institutions. Insurance companies have a lot of money that is invested in the market in a variety of markets. They stand to gain. Those that are in the home insurance market would stand to gain from the kind of removal of forest waste and de-risking the risk of forest fire. Is there ever any synergy between the bioeconomy and let's say insurance companies in terms of mitigating not only climate risk, but specifically that forest risk you mentioned?
Yes, and I would add into that the utilities, which Pacific Gas and Electric, one of the three utilities in California, went bankrupt because of forest fire insurance claims. So both the utility industry as well as the insurance industry should really be thinking a little bit more long term. Currently, we're running between $25 and $40 billion a year of insurance claims related to wildfires, and every bit of that is feedstock for making below zero carbon liquid fuels as well as below zero carbon electricity. And as you know, Governor Newsom has declared that his goal is to move toward electricity in transportation. But currently that means we're moving toward coal and petroleum natural gas as a feedstock for our transportation in California. And so decarbonizing the electricity market, which of course forest wood could be used as a mechanism to assist in that process, is pretty important. Let me make one additional point, and that is zero emission is what the governor actually stated. He did not state electric vehicles. And so the general media interpretation was immediately drop on the idea that zero emission equals electric, and that happens to not be true. A fuel cell running on ethanol could be considered a zero emission vehicle in California. And if you're trying to decarbonize heavy truck, long haul trucking, et cetera, batteries are not going to be the right solution. You need an energy dense fuel. And if you can reform it on board into electricity using a reformer and a fuel cell, you now have a zero emission vehicle operating entirely on liquid fuels. And if that's a carbon negative liquid fuel from waste material such as dairy renewable natural gas, it's a tremendously economic feedstock that comes out of a dairy. And so that's why we have made this long-term multi-decade investment.
Yeah, it would have been helpful if the governor of California had been better informed about the need to emphasize zero emissions rather than zero emission vehicles, because the tailpipe isn't really the issue. It's more about the carbon, and having a coal-fired plant feeding an electric vehicle is not probably the direction that we want to go, yet that's the direction which we were pointed at.